Last month, it was announced that Marvel is going to be dropping Blade from their upcoming release calendar, and they have no plans, at least right now, of when they're actually going to be releasing this movie. And when this was announced, a lot of people, myself included, were saying this is probably an indicator that they're just going to be done with the movie entirely, because one of the things that they don't like to do is they don't like to just outright announce that they're canceling a project. They'll just do something like this, just drop it from any release schedule, and then just kind of quietly cancel it. And then over time, eventually maybe make the announcement that it's no longer moving forward with it. But it looks like that's not the case with the upcoming reboot of Blade, because Kevin Feige came out recently and made a statement basically saying that Marvel is still very much committed to making a Blade reboot. They just don't necessarily know when they're actually going to get this going, because there's been a lot of trouble with the whole production of it, which is pretty crazy when you think about it, because they announced it back in 2019. And since then, they still haven't gotten anything, not even a script as far as we know. And if you really compare it to the early days of the MCU, the whole phase one of the MCU took place over the course of 5 years. And they haven't been able to make one Blade movie within that time frame. And it's not like we don't have a format to work from. We have 3 Blade movies that have already been made, and people like those movies. Well, maybe not the third one as much, but we have 2 very good Blade movies that people like. And that's kind of a good template to go off. But apparently they couldn't figure that out, so they've had to keep going back to the drawing board and figure out what they can do with it. But maybe if they are committed to doing it and doing it right, then something can actually work for them. This is being reported on from Variety right here. Marvel is still committed to Blade. Kevin Feige says after a movie pulled from a release calendar, the character will indeed make it to the MCU. Now, it's also it's also kind of a question, I would say, whether it's going to be the Mahershala Ali Blade or the Wesley Snipes Blade, because after Wesley Snipes had his appearance in Deadpool and Wolverine, and a lot of people really liked what they did with him in that, liked him as the role. And then they're thinking like, well, maybe there is another movie that we could have with Wesley Snipes, and that would probably be pretty cool if they ended up doing that, had another Blade movie, but it was just the Wesley Snipes version in the MCU. I can see that being pretty popular and doing well if they pulled it off right. Not to necessarily disparage Mahershala Ali, because I do think he actually does have the potential to do a good job in the role as far as casting goes. When I first heard about him being cast as Blade in a reboot, I was thinking like, okay, I can see him playing the role. But you also have to keep in mind, I believe he's in his 50s right now when Wesley Snipes first started the role, even though he's older than Mahershala Ali is now. Wesley Snipes started when he was in his 30s, and even though Mahershala Ali, I think he is definitely a good enough actor to pull off the role, and he looks the part, I'm just not convinced that he would necessarily have the staying power, because if they were to have him in a movie, especially if they're taking this long to actually get going, most you can think of maybe 1 or 2 movies with him, and that's it. So if you're just going to have a Blade for 1 or 2 movies, then I would say you might as well go Wesley Snipes and just do an older version of Blade. Because right now, if you're going to try to do a Mahershala Ali with playing, I want to say a younger Blade, but more of a, I don't know, kind of a Blade at his prime sort of thing, then it doesn't feel like it would necessarily work, especially if you're comparing the physical capabilities of the 2 actors. Wesley Snipes in his prime was more of a physical action-oriented actor than Mahershala Ali is. So that's why I would think if you're going to do this, maybe just stick with Wesley Snipes. At least that's kind of, I'm not saying that's the impression I'm getting from this article, but I can see that being the route that that Marvel chooses to go with this sort of thing. Marvel Studios recently took Mahershala Ali's long-delayed Blade movie off its release calendar, but studio president Kevin Feige is telling fans not to worry about whether or not the iconic vampire hunter will find his way into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Blade is coming, he promises. And another interesting thing of note when it comes to this, when they took it off the release calendar, the Mahershala Ali Blade one, that was after Deadpool and Wolverine came out, and a lot of people really took to Wesley Snipes coming back into the role. So that's what makes me think maybe that would be the direction they're going to take this. I'm not making any claims right now. This is me just kind of thinking out loud, because I could see them actually doing that, bringing Wesley Snipes back and just saying like, this is the direction we want to go with it. And I think a lot of people will be happy with that. We are committed to Blade, Feige told Omelette via IGN during the D23 Brazil 2024 event. We love the character. We love Mahershala's take on him. And rest assured, whenever we change direction with a project or are still figuring out how it fits into our schedule, we let the audience know you're all up to date on what's happening. But I can tell you that the character will indeed make it to the MCU. So, I mean, that does seem pretty definitive right now. They want to do something with Blade. They don't know what they're going to do with them just yet, but that's something that they want to have in the MCU. So they're going to figure out how to make it work. Okay, I can buy that. It's just a matter of them wanting to do it is enough alone, because they could want to do a lot of things. They want all their movies to be financially successful too. Just because they want it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it. So even if Kevin Feige says that they're committed to doing this, which I could take him at face value for that one, I believe maybe he does actually want to have a Blade in the MCU, but it's just a matter of whether they're capable of pulling that off. And so far, everything we've seen, it doesn't look like that's really the case. Marvel originally announced Blade movie with Ali in July 2019, but development has been rocky as several writers and directors have come and gone over the years. Feige told Black Tree TV over the summer during his Deadpool and Wolverine press tour that not rushing the Blade movie has been a big priority for the studio. There's a big difference between not rushing the production, and I wouldn't say they're dragging their feet, but come on, it's been over 5 years. You could probably pick up the pace just a little bit at this point. I mean, for the last 2 years, as we've been trying to crack the movie, the most important thing for us is not rushing it and making sure we are making the right Blade movie, Feige said at the time. And then it just kind of goes into some of the writers and directors who have since signed on to the project and left it for various creative reasons. The creative reasons are always cited. It's usually just the creators or the people that they hire, the writers and directors, don't see eye to eye with the direction that the studio wants to take it in. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the fact that they're writing this or they're focusing on the particular movie, like the Blade movie, whereas Kevin Feige is trying to think of like the MCU as a whole. So he's trying to figure out how Blade will fit in with all that other stuff. And they just can't seem to find something that gels between the two of them. And that's why a lot of these people just get tired of trying to figure it out. And you're like, okay, well then I guess I'll just leave the project then, because apparently this just isn't going to work. And one of the things I've said about Blade, if you want to do it, not worry about trying to fit it in with the MCU as a whole. If they're going to actually make a Blade movie, you can make a Blade movie. Don't try to figure out like, okay, where are we going to have these cameos, team ups, and callbacks to other things? How are we going to set up for something else? You don't need to do that. I would almost say treat it like the Netflix Marvel shows where they're part of the MCU. I mean, they're kind of part of it. They weren't though. They were kind of their own thing. But that's the way I think they should have treated Blade. Is he's exists within that universe, but he's not necessarily a part of that universe. So you can do with him whatever you want, and even have it completely tonally different. And I think it would work better that way, as opposed to trying to figure out like, okay, when can we have him team up with some other characters? Because I don't think that's really the way to go. Now, I'm not saying that's the direction they're trying to take this, but that seems to be the impression I'm getting with all the issues that they're having with the production. I think Kevin Feige's trying to tie it into everything else. And a lot of the other people who are fans of Blade, who are trying to actually make a Blade movie, aren't necessarily trying to do that. And that's where a lot of them are getting frustrated and eventually leaving the projects. So it reports that had gone through at least 5 writers at the time, budget of $100 million, which would be the lowest production budget for any movie within the MCU. And I'm talking like throughout the whole MCU, not even adjusted for inflation. But I don't think that's really a bad budget for a Blade movie if you're just going to do it right, because you don't necessarily need a whole lot of money around a Blade movie. It's a pretty, I'm not saying it's a simple story, but I mean, it's not as complex and it doesn't really involve as much of effects as a lot of the other movies in the MCU, especially if you do it right. When you compare it to the original Blade movie, that budget was around $45 million or something like that. And if you adjust that for inflation, that would be probably around $90 million in 2024. So $100 million for a Blade movie, I think, is actually a good amount for this. So people could read into that a little bit and say like, oh, they're trying to slash the budget on this. And maybe there is some of that, but I think $100 million is okay if they are going to continue with this. I'm just kind of wondering how much money they've actually spent on it up to this point, because all the writers and people that they've had work on it and then leave the project, they don't work for free. For people who don't know, those people are paid for that work. So they're probably into this movie several $1,000,000 already, and they haven't even gotten a finished script yet. The most recent release date was November 7th, 2025, but Disney has removed the title and will release Predator Badlands on that day instead. Marvel currently has 3 untitled projects on their calendar for February 18th, 28, May 5th, 28, and November 10th, 28, although the studio has not confirmed if one of those dates is for Blade. And I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure those dates were already on, those untitled projects were already on their release calendar when Blade was still on the release calendar. So them removing Blade from that doesn't necessarily mean that they're done with the project or anything, or it's going to take over one of those spots. It looks like they just don't have any plans for Blade at this point. And like Kevin Feige was saying, they are still committed to doing it and they want to make a Blade movie. But me personally, like I said, I'm just not convinced. Even if they have the will, they're not necessarily going to be able to pull that off. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you actually want them to make a Blade movie? Or if they are going to make a Blade movie, would you prefer Mahershala Ali trying the part? Or do you think they should just go back to Wesley Snipes? Because that's kind of the camp I'm in. But I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about this. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.